Okay, we're back. Last day, 4-day stream. Oh, it's so sad to see the weekend go bye-bye. It is what it is. Got to work in the morning. I want to. I got 2 more weeks before my vacation. Stress. Hi, Jayla. How you doing? Ah, 2 more weeks. 2 weeks. Yameru, Yameru, Yameru. I wish. Anyway, okay. Oh God. Like like beaten or like beaten actually beaten or whether beaten or both beaten or okay. Okay. Whew. No injuries. Not good. That's not how you start a work week with loads of bruises and shit. I mean, unless you like bruises, but some people are like that. All right. So last we were doing the stories, we were doing the part where Kalik is sort of becoming part of Malagos in the past at this point by this artifact that is Titan forged. And sometimes he feels like he's becoming a part of Malagos at this point. Randomly wakes up in strange areas, has dreams about what's been going on. And now he's been trying to work on the Nexus. Now, if you remember what the Nexus is, it's where the blue dragons work from. Dragon, no, they're not in Dragonblight. It's but it's in Northrend because blue magic dragons always live up in cold climes. Um, so he started working on the defense grid, and it turns out that the artifact started to take control of. I have to mess with something on my desk. I know, it's every time. Uh, the artifact started taking over the defenses of the Nexus. That's where I left off. Um, Now, mind you, that Wordrest Temple, Nexus, all of those are pretty much basically Titan constructed buildings. For some reason, nobody ever told Kalik this. I mean, he becomes aspect for like 2 seconds, then has to surrender the power, and then they never taught him anything. The typical Titan behavior. We don't talk about Titan stuff. It just is. And yeah, I think the Nexus is also built from Titans. I don't know. I don't know if dragons made that or not, but even so, if it is like Malagos who built the Nexus so that he can use that as a major ley line hub, even so, he is Titan constructed at this point when he built the Nexus. So it was basically like what I had a problem with yesterday was that, I mean, they even said it outright. Now, we had gone to an area of Outland where the um, twisting nether, when the planet exploded because of Nerzul's gaff, um, altered all the well, most of the black dragons in certain areas into those nether dragons. And we were messing around with some kind of a time device to get samples for a gnome who wanted to study that. Now, when we did that, they had a couple of different phases. You could have a worm, you could have a young whelp, or you could have a proto dragon, nether dragon. Those don't exist. It should be a black dragon, or at least a black proto dragon for the most part. That's not what these looked like. These looked like the crocolisks that live in the area, only with nether storm looking, where they're kind of transparent and purple and kind of misty and such like that. And it's like that's not right. That's not possible. There's no such thing as a proto nether drake. It would be a black nether drake. I mean, a black proto drake. So, and it even says in the quest line that those nether drakes used to be black dragons. They got caught up in the blast. So I don't know. I don't know who messed this up. Let's put it that way. I don't know who messed that up. But yeah, there's a lot of things here. It's sort of like you didn't take this into consideration and such. And poor Kalik never got taught anything about what's going on here. And now he's got a Titan artifact in the Nexus, which is the major ley lines of Azeroth right there. That's where they all intersect. And a Titan artifact, and it just took over the Nexus. So that's where we're at right now. All right, let's get into it. Jaina Proudmoore reappeared in her chambers, her exhaustion having more to do with Kalik than with her magical efforts. She knew that he was hiding much from her, and while she appreciated his obvious worry for her, she also resented it. Kalik was a blue dragon, and yes, that meant that he understood aspects of the magical arts in a way that even she did not. But Jaina also considered herself more than capable of facing most such situations and using human adaptability to ferret out solutions that perhaps a dragon might not think about. She summoned a chair next to her. Taking a minute to gather her thoughts, the Archmage relived her visit to the Nexus. With those thoughts came guilt of her own. She had held back some of the truth from Kalik, too. Jaina had not arrived just before he had noticed her. In fact, she was the one who had almost discovered. Only a quick manipulation of magic had enabled her to focus his attention elsewhere, long enough for her to shift her location to where it would seem she had just entered the area. And even that might not have been necessary if Jaina had not been concerned that Kalik would realize just how long she had been there. Long enough to discover the relic. The Archmage had no more precise name for it. Artifact, relic. Jaina suspected that Kalik thought of it in the same terms. It was like nothing she had ever seen. And that included personal knowledge of a variety of powerful magical objects comparable to the collection stored in the Nexus. Yet if it was like nothing she had ever seen, it was not entirely a mystery to her. She did identify one significant factor, possibly something that even Kalik may not recognize. She had come across such spell work in the past, only twice and of much lesser degree, but she had definitely seen its like before. It was a spell work older than dragons, spell work that they spoke of a unique knowledge lost to magi of her time. Spell work that Jaina, at least, believed had ties to the legendary keepers, or even the Titans themselves. The Archmage had certainly not journeyed to the Nexus with such a discovery in her mind. All she had truly had to go on was her suspicion that there was something in the Nexus tied to Calic's strange behavior. It had been her intention to speak with him and find an excuse while doing so to use her power surreptitiously to seek anything amiss. Jaina had believed that she could do this even without Calic sensing it. And had that opportunity not presented itself, she had plotted other ways by which she would have had some time alone to try to decipher the truth. However, all of her planning had proved unnecessary, for there had been no hint of Calic upon her arrival. The weakened wards had made it easy to gain entrance, and once she had verified that Calic was nowhere to be seen, she had begun to investigate her surroundings. To her surprise, finding the relic had been quite easy. It had radiated a unique magical trace. In addition, it seemed that Calic had not even bothered to secrete it in one of the many arcane prisons or other caches designed to hold such powerful magical items. The artifact had simply sat out in the open in the first major chamber she entered. Some might have been unnerved by the thing, but Jaina had only been fascinated. She studied its aura, admired its design, and delved as deeply as she cautiously could into its core. But in the end, Jaina had learned little. So significant was this find that she had actually considered taking the artifact with her, even despite her near disaster created by her intention to use another relic, the iris, in revenge for Theramore's destruction by it at the hands of the orc Garrosh. However, before Jaina could bring herself to seize the artifact in the Nexus, the Archmage had suddenly sensed Calic nearby. Not sure how he would react to her obvious intrusion, Jaina had masked her presence as best she could, then worked to make certain that Calic did not know she was there while she quickly shifted her location. Even then, he had almost noticed her. Yet if Jaina did not have the artifact with her to study, she did have access to other avenues that might give her a clue to what it was and how it might be related to the changes in Calic's personality. Jaina was convinced that he was in desperate danger, perhaps not only to his mind, but also to his body. Jaina summoned a thick silver tome from the highest shelf. As it neared her, the book opened, and pages began flipping. A narrowing of the Archmage's eyes caused the page to cease turning. With the book still hovering at reading level, she surveyed the contents. The Archmage who had written these pages had marked the two items she was particularly interested in as remnants of the period shortly after order had been brought to Azeroth. Jaina had sought these because something in the artifact's appearance had reminded her of something the Archmage had read when she first had combed through this book for other reasons. To her frustration, the 2 pages before her presented Jaina with nothing. They were details of where the items had been found and who had been involved in discovering them. There were also notations on previous studies of the Titans and Keepers, believed to have been identified as having influenced the regions where the finds had been made. While such notes were interesting to Jaina in a scholarly way, she sought more. The page turned. Theories about the Titans and the Keepers dominated, some concerning the extent of their ties to one another. Jaina started to skip farther ahead, then recalled something mentioning within the theories. She found it. As the young mage Ruflo insisted, the vision he claimed to have had from touching it suggested Keeper influence in its design. Archmage Theolinus had his own theory on Keeper influence in other regions. Jaina let out a grunt of exasperation. She skipped down past theories that she normally would have had more interested in, hoping to find what she thought she recalled. The name Rufus finally came up again. It had been so long since Jaina had read through this part that she could not remember what else Rufus had told his masters about the vision, but surely it had to be in this section. But scarcely had she begun reading when the Archmage stepped back in such shock that she accidentally cancelled the spell holding the book in place. The ancient tome dropped with a loud thud on the floor, the pages now askew. Her heart pounding, Jaina had knelt by the damaged book. Her concern was not for what she had allowed to happen to it, but for rereading the passage. With a wave of her hand, the other pages flew by until the one she sought once again faced her. Rufo, Rufo, she muttered, seeking his name. Rufo might have had the answer to that. His death is a sad footnote to an otherwise intriguing expedition into a study of the past. She had gone too far. The Archmage went back a few paragraphs. Once there, Jaina read more carefully. The third day after the find. An entire afternoon of searching revealed nothing, not even with the finest spells at work. Only after dark, only when one last attempt was made, did someone find his body. Body, Jaina murmured, praying that she had read wrong. According to the reports at first glance, the consensus was that he had somehow lost his way and fallen off the peak. Certainly that explained how mangled Rufol's corpse was said to be. However, later conversations by the representative of the Kirin Tor with those who knew him best give indication of a peculiar and sudden madness that descended upon Rufo prior to his disappearance. The ultimate conclusion was that this vision the young mage mentioned was the start of his insanity. It ended there, the next paragraph continuing on with matters Jaina found for the moment tedious. Still certain that she had read more than this previously, she desperately searched the succeeding pages, but to no avail. She returned to the ones she had read and studied them closely, but quickly verified that she had missed nothing. And yet, somewhere she had read more. The Archmage cast her eyes upon the many tomes, scrolls, journals, and other writings before her. Within one of them, the details she hunted for surely existed. She just had to recall which one, or keep looking until she found what she sought. But staring at the imposing collection, the Archmage wondered if after she managed to locate the information, it would already be too late for Knaak. The artifact was as bound to the Nexus wards as this had been set so since the latter were first cast. Knaak doubted that Malygos could have weakened the accursed thing's power into the array with such mastery. It again bespoke the great skill of whoever had created the relic, a being the Blue Dragon could only assume was the cloaked and hooded form of which both he and the young Malygos had caught glimpses. A being Knaak had already come to hate deeply. For what seemed the 100th time, Knaak followed a magical trail in the array in the hopes of finding some flaw that he could exploit. He did not want to leave the Nexus at the mercy of the artifact, even though thus far it has done no visible harm to the place. Still, considering what it had done to Knaak, the Blue did not want to take any chances. Tainted! Tainted! With a pained roar, Knaak pulled back from his work. He clutched his head, trying to keep the voices at bay, but they shouted so loudly that all else was drowned out. Must destroy them! No, they are us! No, they ate one of us! The Nexus became a maelstrom. Knaak lost his balance, spun around, and fell. But before he could strike the floor, he suddenly hovered above the ground, surveying what appeared to be the start of a civil war amongst the proto-dragons Telenixa had gathered. At least 7 individual combats caught the eye, or rather Malygos' eye, and one of them included both Neltharion and Ozdormu. Despite the fight being 2 against 1, the pair was very tentative in its attacks against the silver-green female before them. She, on the other hand, snapped and clawed at them with abandon, eschewing tactics of any sort. As Malygos landed nearby, she lunged at Neltharion. Malygos knew well by now the charcoal-gray male's eagerness for battle, and was so surprised when Neltharion sought desperately to avoid her sharp but smaller teeth. Neltharion scuttled back as the jaws neared his throat, and Ozdormu laughed at the perfect moment and tore out the preoccupied female's gullet. He struck so artfully that he had already withdrawn before the female even realized she was mortally wounded. Her chest quickly soaking with her blood, the stricken proto-dragon started to turn towards Nosdormu, and then fell on her face. As Kalik and his host struggled to make sense of the events, the other seemingly mad proto-dragons were herded together. Some of those facing the prisoners appeared to be barely able to keep from trying to rip them apart. One of those preventing that was Ysera, who issued a warning. "Be careful! Watch teeth! Stay back!" Beyond the scene, Talanixa watched with an unreadable expression. Kalik wanted Malagos to keep an eye on her, but his host was more interested in what Ysera was attempting to do. The more the tableau unfolded, the more it appeared that Alexstrasza's sister was every bit as concerned for the afflicted as she was for those surrounding them. While both Malagos and Kalik could appreciate that she was trying to prevent further bloodshed amongst proto-dragons, when the true threat was clearly Galakron, the blue dragon and his host were in agreement that this could not end well. The surrounded band snapped at their captors and seemed not to recognize those whom Malagos knew they should. Malagos noted something about each of the captured proto-dragons. Every one of those whom the icy blue male could see sported bite wounds from some previous but still recent fight. Bite wounds. Malagos started to glance down at his paw, only to be interrupted by Alexstrasza. The fire-orange female looked relieved to see him. "You live! We thought you dead." "Almost. Koros. He is dead." Before he could relay to her the full tale and its import, Alexstrasza looked back at where her sister still worked to keep the two groups from converging on each other. "She does not understand. They must die. Even I know that." That drew Malagos's attention from the need to tell his story. "Must die? Why?" "The bites. The bites of the non-living. They make a hunger. They make these want to eat one another. They make them like Galakron." Her words shook both Kalik and his host. Malagos could not keep from shivering as he remembered his struggles after being bitten. He looked past Alexstrasza to the maddened proto-dragons, recalling his own growing bloodlust and how he had barely kept from doing just as these apparently desired. Alexstrasza mistook his reaction for disgust at what the captives had turned into. She hissed. "Ysera thinks of our clutch brother. She thinks him out there still." This further dismayed Malagos. "Would be not living. Clutch brother long dead," Alexstrasza reminded him. "Long dead when Malagos finds him." That should have reassured him, but so many things have happened that even a clever proto-dragon such as Malagos considered himself had doubts. True, other old corpses had remained dead, at least, the last time Malagos had seen them. Now the icy blue male wondered whether those corpses would still be there if he went to find them again. And then his thoughts returned to just how these other proto-dragons had been changed. They had all been bitten. They had all succumbed to the monstrous hunger that Malagos had fought more than once. Kalik sensed his host considering fleeing before someone recognized the wound and added him to the mad. Still, Malagos held his ground and watched as the tableau played out. Talanixa finally acted, shoving past smaller proto-dragons to face Ysera and the afflicted. Despite their growing madness, the imprisoned proto-dragons remained cowed by the powerful female. "Kill them! No! Must help them!" Ysera insisted, staring defiantly. "Kill them, or they will bite us." As she spoke, Talanixa pressed Alexstrasza's sister back, forcing her closer to the mad. "They bite you." Whether a bite from one of the afflicted would affect a proto-dragon the way a bite from the undead did was a question Kalik doubted any there knew the answer to yet. But Talanixa's words stirred fear in several of those in attendance. Even Alexstrasza's sister looked uncertain. Without warning, one of the afflicted hissed and started toward Ysera. Before Alexstrasza could go to her sister's aid, Ysera, her uncertainty vanishing, turned her steady gaze on her would-be attacker. The madness faded somewhat. The other proto-dragon let his head drop low, then shuffled back. To Kalik, he seemed ashamed that he had tried to harm the smaller female. Ysera faced Talanixa. Must help them. No time. We must fight Galakron, the larger female declared. She looked at those watching the argument. We fight! Yes! As they had before, the majority of the other proto-dragons hissed their agreement. Even in the face of such a lack of support, Ysera pressed. These are us! These are us! The gathering quieted. Alexstrasza's sister moved towards the crowd, beseeching. These are us. We help them. We help us. Some of those listening looked at one another and thought. Talanixa's eyes narrowed more. Yes, she hissed quietly, suddenly very agreeable. Yes, we help them. Talanixa eyed the afflicted. But we must keep them safe. Must keep us safe. Help them when we can. She turned and studied the west. Must keep them safe, yes? Come, bring them. Clearly confident that she would be obeyed, Talanixa took flight. Several of the proto-dragons surrounding the afflicted looked warily at Ysera. Alexstrasza's sister stared at them with defiance, then glanced at the captured figures. Come, she murmured soothingly. Come. Slowly, Ysera rose in the air. As she did, she gestured with her head after Talanixa. The surrounded proto-dragons reluctantly followed Ysera. They were flanked by Talanixa's ardent supporters. The rest of the assembled proto-dragons looked more than willing to stay behind, but to Kalik's surprise, his host suddenly leapt after Ysera. Even Alexstrasza was not so swift. Out of the corner of Malagos's eye, Kalik saw Neltharion and Nostromo follow suit. The scene abruptly shifted, but Kalik sensed that only a short time had passed. Now Talanixa led the band toward a narrow valley. There! She roared, indicating with a dip of her wing another pass. Talanixa descended. As the proto-dragons landed, the large females strode towards what initially looked simply like a rock wall. However, as they followed Talanixa around, a narrow crevice revealed itself. At first, Kalik thought it was the entrance to the cave from the one disturbing vision. However, almost immediately, too many details gave indication that was otherwise. Still, Kalik could not help feeling that he knew the reason Talanixa had brought them to this place. Why here? Ysera asked with a hint of suspicion. These ones you defend, they go in here and wait. The pale yellow female peered at the narrow entrance, her suspicion growing. In there? All, or we must slay. The finality of her tone brooked no argument. With reluctance, Ysera at last nodded. They stay here, Talanixa commanded. She indicated some of those guarding the afflicted. 4 here. They guard. Entrance narrow. 4 enough. It was clear to Kalik that his host, that Talanixa would have gladly had the afflicted slaughtered there and then. And Ysera obviously also saw that. She finally acquiesced, then led those she had championed toward the narrow entrance. One by one, the trusting proto-dragons entered the cave. Some had to struggle to get inside, so restrictive was the entrance. Ysera had to keep calming both those waiting to enter and those already inside. The last finally entered. Ysera backed away in order to let the guards take their places. But as the first began to move, Talanixa rumbled, Wait. Ysera hissed. Malagos and Neltharion started toward Talanixa, only to have some of the golden female's most ardent followers block their path. Talanixa exhaled, lightning shot from her maw. 3 bright silver bolts struck the rock face above the entrance. As that happened, a calm Talanixa fluttered back a few short yards. The entire rock face collapsed, spilling over the cave. Ysera leapt toward the avalanche, but before she could sacrifice herself in a vain attempt to save those within, Malagos lunged for her. To his surprise, Nozdormu reached her first, seizing one of her wings with his jaws and carefully but firmly pulling her back just before she would have been crushed to a pulp. Despite there being no doubt regarding Nozdormu's or Malagos's intentions, Ysera snapped at both of them. Her rage undiminished, she whirled on Talanixa. 4 other proto-dragons blocked her path. 2 opened their mouths, but Talanixa's hiss rose above the confrontation, stilling their attack. "It is done," she proclaimed, her massive wings stretched to enhance her size and thus her dominance. "No taint among us. All tainted must die." Ysera exhaled. The 2 guards directly in front of her blinked and nearly collapsed. Stunned, they proved no impediment to her charge. She burst past them and sought Talanixa. But the larger female awaited this foolhardy act. She shifted as Ysera neared. Her long, powerful tail struck her much smaller adversary across the head with a loud crack. Alexstrasza rushed by Malagos and the others in time to reach her sister, just as Ysera fell back stunned. The 2 crashed into each other, ending in a heap. "It is done," Talanixa repeated, acting as if she had not even noticed Ysera's impudence. "Come, must be ready for Galakrond." With that, Talanixa and all except for Malagos and his friends silently departed. The male moved in to aid the sisters, only to have Ysera roll to her feet and rush to the buried cave. Ignoring the small bits of stone and dirt still raining down, she used her hind paws to try to rip away at the tons of rock. However, as Ysera tore at the avalanche, additional stones loosened above. They fell down, not only more than replacing what she had dug away, but also battering her enough that Alexstrasza at last righted, risked injury to herself, and pulled her struggling sibling to safety. "Save them," the smaller sister insisted, her frantic gaze darting from Alexstrasza to the males. "They still live. Hear them." Malagos listened, but he detected nothing. Yet both Kalik and his host, and also the other future aspects, knew that Ysera spoke the truth. There was just nothing they could do. 100 proto-dragons digging without pause would not have been able to reach those within in time. Malagos understood that as well as Kalik, and so did the rest, even Ysera. Still, despite her awareness of the futility of what she attempted, Ysera again rushed to the fall and tried digging. She kicked away rock after rock, only to have more fill the momentary gaps. The others finally shoved in front of Ysera and forced her away. She continued to stare at the buried entrance, and at one point, through Malagos's ears, Kalik heard her say, gasping, "Dralad." After several tense moments, Alexstrasza's sister stilled. However, now there was a distant look in her eyes, as if her mind remained elsewhere. "We must go," Malagos at last suggested quietly. Neltharion added, "The hunt for Galakrond will begin soon. We must be there." "The hunt for Galakrond?" Nozdormu mocked, startling both Malagos and Kalik by even speaking. From what Kalik gathered from his host, young Nozdormu spoke only when he seemed to have something significant to add. Otherwise, some might have taken him for one of the less advanced, more animalistic proto-dragons, unable to talk. Hunted by, it will be. Yet despite saying that, the brown male was the first to leap into the air. To the surprise of the rest, Ysera immediately followed. Alexstrasza joined her sister, leaving Malagos and Neltharion to find themselves bringing up the rear. However, as they ascended, Kalik, but not Malagos, noticed Ysera surreptitiously glancing back at the ruined cave, where some of the afflicted proto-dragons likely still struggled to survive before the air gave out. She then glanced at Malagos, but not directly at his face. Rather, Kalik noticed that she eyed his lower leg, the same leg where the one undead had bitten Malagos's paw. Kalik's view shifted again. Ahead of the five, Telenixa and her gathered host hovered in the air. He realized that they were already setting out to find Galakron. Several of the other proto-dragons noted the small band's arrival, which in turn alerted Telenixa. She soared towards the five, her attendants flanking her. As Telenixa confronted Ysera and her companions, the attendants spread out in the obvious battle formation. Malagos and the others instinctively did the same, even against the greater odds. "These can join the hunt," Telenixa decreed. "You, runt, will not." "I will come with," Ysera insisted. "Why? Talk to Galakron? Make a tiny bite for him?" Recalling Koros, whose fate Malagos had still not yet told to Telenixa, the icy blue male shuddered. Kalik shared his unease and wished that Malagos would quickly tell everyone in the hopes that perhaps it would deter them from this mad attack. However, his host didn't speak, at the moment only concerned with the safety of his friends and not thinking of the potential repercussions of saying nothing. "We'll not go," Alexstrasza said. "We'll stay with my sister." "I stay also," Nosdorma briefly added. Neltharion momentarily looked frustrated, his natural tendency being to go wherever a fight would be promised. Still, he grudgingly nodded his agreement with the other two. Malagos added his voice to his friends, not that Telenixa seemed to care at that point. She started to turn from the five. Only then did Kalik, host, finally recall what he should have told everyone at the first chance. "Wait! Must speak of Koros." Suspicious Telenixa looked back. "Koros?" As best as he could, Malagos quickly related to her and the rest of the fate of the treacherous proto-dragon, leaving out only those details where his own struggle with the infection from the undead's bite were concerned. The far simpler language of his host frustrated Kalik, who knew that he could have explained much more clearly, but the essence of what Malagos sought to tell was evidently understood by Telenixa and the others. But rather than be daunted by their savage tale, the imposing female simply sneered. "Koros, fool! What gives us victory?" She peered at her loyal but confused followers. "Galakron knows where we are, where we go. We fool him. We attack before. We attack in a different place." "Not good," Nosdormu muttered, his words going unheard by the increasingly confident Telenixa. "Must strike now," she spun from Malagos again. "Come, we attack." The gathered proto-dragons left the five behind. Neltharion fluttered back and forth, obviously desiring to be part of the coming battle, but in the end choosing his comrades over his desires. Still, he could not help expressing himself. "Why we not fight? Not like Telenixa, but we fight our way. We fight our own plan." "And die as stupidly as they?" Nosdormu, proving quite talkative this day, interrupted calmly. "There must be peace." Even Alexstrasza eyed her sister with something close to exasperation. "Ysera." Without warning, the smaller female darted off. There was no doubt about her intentions. She still hoped to change the course of events, however mad that seemed to both Kalik and his host. Worse, Alexstrasza immediately chased after her sister, which caused the increasingly impatient Neltharion to do the same. Nosdormu looked at Malagos. The scene suddenly shifted. Even though Kalik was better prepared for it, he still raged at being ripped from the moment before he knew how it would continue to play. There was a very real feeling running through him that despite the fact that all of this took place in the past, It had a relevance to his time that he dared not ignore. He, as much as Malagos, darted amongst the frosty peaks of the northern regions in great haste, searching with more and more desperation for someone whom at first Kalik could not identify from the proto-dragon's racing thoughts. The only thing that Kalik could tell was that something had caused a change in events. When it was finally flashed through Malagos's mind as he dived to investigate a shallow cave in one frosty area. Telonix's great host had been unable to find the gargantuan Galacrond. How a creature as huge as the twisted proto-dragon could suddenly vanish was a question that greatly plagued Kalik's host and also bothered Kalik. However, it was not the reason for Malagos's mad hunt in this obscure place, far too near the misshapen Leviathan's known haunts. Malagos was hunting Ysera. A shadow crossed Malagos. Neltharion dropped down. Nothing, the charcoal gray male bellowed. I smell her, but nothing. Her scent pervaded the area, but was not strong enough to be identified as very recent. Ysera might have passed this way as long ago as 2 days. Kalik understood now that it had been 4 days since the shift in the vision. Indeed, the last time anyone had seen Ysera was shortly after that scene had changed for Kalik. The weaker female had risen into the thick clouds, whereupon her trail had somehow faded. It had taken a frantic Alexstrasza another day and a half to locate a trail, but only after the four had already confronted an angry Talonixa leading a befuddled force in search of the absent Galacrond. He is scared, Talonixa had roared at the top of her voice for any to hear, perhaps even Galacrond himself. He knows we hunt. He flees us. This had hardly been the opinion of Malagos or his friends, but their voices had not been of interest to Talonixa. She had led her army off to the east, leaving the four to continue their own search. But why Ysera had abandoned the others when she had what... Try again. But why Ysera had abandoned the others when she had was still not apparent. Malagos had his suspicions, and from what Kalik divined, his host believed, not unreasonably, that Alexstrasza's sister had sought out Galacrond to plead again for a stop to the carnage. If so, there was a very good reason she had thus far remained unfound, a reason that none of the 3 males dared speak out loud in the presence of Alexstrasza. Ysera might have already been a victim of Galacrond, foolishly placing herself in the mad behemoth's maw as easily as Koros had. Saw nothing, Malagos informed Neltharion now, his pulse still pounding from his own swift search. Another proto-dragon soared above. Seeing that it was Nozdormu, both calmed. The third male appeared to have had no better luck than they. Of Alexstrasza there was no sign, although Kalik understood that Malagos had a fair notion where she would be found. Once arriving at this place where Ysera's scent had grown stronger, they had divided up to cover certain areas where a proto-dragon could easily be hidden from sight. But thus far they had discovered nothing. She is not here, Neltharion suggested. Was, but is not. His tone echoed Malagos's own concerns about Ysera's fate. Neither wanted to be the one to approach Alexstrasza with what seems more and more the truth. Maybe search more, the charcoal gray male recommended with some hesitation. Maybe flew too fast? I do that. They both knew that they had scoured their respective areas thoroughly, but being reluctant to face a dismayed Alexstrasza, they split up again. Malagos banked, then dropped lower. He did not expect to find anything, Kalik knew, but the only other choice was to report his failure to the fire-orange female. The sharp eyes of the hunter surveyed the icy soil and frosty rock walls ahead. Malagos quickly recognized a few places where Ysera might have been able to secret herself. However, he already knew that she could not have possibly slipped by him, and sure enough, the first three locations were as empty as he recalled them. Something moved near the mouth of the last cave. It was such a brief glimpse that neither Kalik nor his host could identify just what it was. The proto-dragon dived to investigate. He slowed when he neared the cave. There was the danger that whatever lurked within was not only There was the danger that whatever lurked within was not only not Ysera, but a threat. Malagos squinted. The cave was utterly dark. That in itself unsettled the proto-dragon. His sharp eyes should have been able to penetrate the blackness for at least a few feet. Kalik's trepidation matched Malagos's as the proto-dragon first sniffed the air, then scenting nothing, chose to enter. Visibility remained almost non-existent as Malagos progressed. The icy blue male hesitated. Kalik's host sensed something amiss, but it was nothing that his mind could identify. However, Kalik, able to feel the ancient world, noted the hint of some great power nearby. "Welcome, clever hunter," came a deep voice with an otherworldly quality that made Kalik want to gasp and made Malagos instinctively retreat a step from that direction. A low silver light arose from the darkness. Within, a cloaked and hooded form already familiar to Kalik coalesced. Hissing, Malagos retreated ahead. He retreated again. Yet if the proto-dragon sought the way out, he was not to find it, nor was even Kalik able to note where it was. Only darkness prevailed except where the tiny figure stood. Curiously, though, despite the fact that Malagos loomed over it, the mysterious figure unnerved the proto-dragon. It had little to do with what was to Malagos a very odd two-legged shape, and more to do with the tremendous power Kalik had felt earlier. But while Kalik had come to grips with the fact that, through his host, he confronted the form he had caught out of the corner of his eye in the Nexus, the dragon began to notice something else amiss with the elf before him. Although by Kalik's estimation, the murky figure was barely taller than a night elf, the more Kalik studied it, the more the blue dragon could not help thinking that what he saw was not what actually stood here. He had the feeling of being far more imposing than this, a being that instead of gazing up at the proto-dragon should have been gazing down. "Who are you?" Malagos demanded. "Who?" "Follow the strengthening wind when you depart," the figure answered, at first making no sense to either Kalik or his host. "You will find your friend there." Another hiss escaped Malagos. "What thing are you?" "A friend, I hope." From the cloak emerged the strong hand of what Kalik judged to be a warrior. It pulled the hood back. For the proto-dragon, it was yet another revelation of just how strange the creature was. For Kalik, though, what stood revealed was enough to identify the figure for what he was, even though the dragon had never himself seen such beings in the flesh. A keeper. It can only be a keeper, Kalik thought with awe. The keepers were creatures of myth and legend to most other races. Even as the aspect of magic, Kalik had learned little of them beyond their work or overseeing the refinement of Azeroth after the Titans brought order to it, and the fact that several of the keepers had built temples in the Storm Peaks. Evidence of their great achievements could also be found in obscure places around the world, but the full effect of their great task remained a question. The skin was a brilliant silver. A thick, long mustache stretched down to the chest and matched the golden hair framing the sturdy, broad-jawed face. Under a heavy brow, eyes the color of the sun and like those of night elves, outwardly seeming to lack pupils, studied the proto-dragon with not only interest but what appeared to be pride. What does he find of so much interest in Malagos? Kalik wondered. You may call me Tyr, the keeper finally answered the proto-dragon's original question. And you are, of course, Malagos. Kalik's host understandably flinched. Baring his teeth, the proto-dragon growled. How do you know my name? I have watched you. I have watched others. I see much potential in you, in these friends of yours. And I say that as someone who has watched many of your kind since the first of you began to stir towards self-consciousness. His answer only made Malagos shake his head in bewilderment and growing mistrust. Tyr was not a huge creature. Malagos believed that he could bite Tyr in half, but he also believed that attempting to do so for unknown reasons would be something that the proto-dragon would regret. He turned away, once more seeking the missing entrance. This time it revealed itself. However, Malagos made no move towards it, as aware as Kalik had that it had reappeared too conveniently. Malagos, of course, did not yet understand magic as Kalik did, but he was clever enough to link the odd happenings with the being who already knew his name without asking. Malagos peered over his shoulder at Tyr. If it is your wish to leave, I will not stop you, Tyr said. With a reptilian grin, Malagos chose to take him at his word. He darted through the gap, clearly expecting to be prevented at the last second. Instead, the open air greeted the icy blue male. The moment he was fully outside, Malagos swung around to face the cave. Kalik understood that he expected to find Tyr following, but of the keeper there was no sign. You see, I did not lie. Snarling, Malagos gazed up at the top of a low ridge. There, an innocent-looking Tyr stood patiently, waiting. The proto-dragon rose into the air until he hovered over the cloaked figure. Tyr calmly spread both his hands wide, a sign of peace. Despite that display, Malagos did not relax, and even Kalik wondered what exactly such a formidable being wanted with a proto-dragon. Not funny, Malagos snapped, rearing his head. He prepared to exhale, something that Kalik thought would only lead to disaster. But at the last moment, the proto-dragon changed his mind. Instead, Malagos veered from the tiny figure and headed on. He did not get far before discovering Tyr standing atop another ridge ahead of him. While this hardly surprised Kalik, the young Malagos proved a hard-headed sort. He immediately turned in another direction and flew as hard as he could from the spot where Tyr stood. The cloaked figure reappeared a short distance ahead. This time, Malagos did not hesitate. Kalik sensed that his host wished not to slay Tyr, only to keep him from following. The stream of frost shot towards Tyr, then split, spraying the rocky surroundings, but not touching him in the least. Please, Tyr quietly began again. I wish only to talk with you about Galacrond. Malagos's mind struggled between attacking, fleeing, and hearing the strange creature out. To Kalik's relief, his host chose the latter. What do you want? Where is Ysera? You will find her, and you will find other things, but those I cannot change. Tyr did not elaborate, instead returning to his original subject. But for the moment we must speak quickly, and about Galacrond. The continued mention of the sinister behemoth made the proto-dragon anxiously glance around, but of course there was no sign of the gargantuan fiend. Malagos peered expectantly at Tyr. We never intended this path, Tyr continued, his own gaze turning inward. A shadow crossed his features. Galacrond should never have journeyed in the direction he did, and we did not prevent it. Now this young world faces annihilation. While Malagos did not understand all of the complex words, he understood enough to catch that there was some tie between Galacrond and this thing. Kalik understood even more than Malagos, but in the end his thoughts finished the same. This being, this keeper, knew why Galakron had become the monster, and felt some fault at that happening. Before Malagos could press the questions that Kalik and he shared, Tyr cut him off. I have been observing so many of you, seeking an answer. I thought for a while, but Koros proved as focused in his obsession as Galakron, but with more foolhardiness than even Galakron contained, it seemed. Koros? You watched him? Why? For the first time, a hint of frustration passed across Tyr's sturdy face. Kalik, though, saw that it was frustration not with Malagos, but with Tyr himself. A good question with no good answer. I leave it at that. What matters is that you might be the key to salvaging this situation, if we can turn this mad charge from disaster to victory. The proto-dragon continued to hover, but Kalik felt his patience quickly fraying. Proto-dragons did not have the patience of dragons, even though Kalik knew his could be very short at times. Malagos was coming close to trying to flee again. Tyr obviously saw that also. He smiled briefly as if to reassure the proto-dragon. In our seeking to guide Azeroth's growth as a whole, we have been too long removed from the daily aspects of the world, too long from interacting with the life of that world. Without guidance, events somehow brought us Galakron. With guidance, we and your kind might be able to set Kalimdor back on its destined path. We fight Galakron? Malagos' tone made clear his questioning of the sanity of Tyr's suggestion. Talanixa fights Galakron. We do not fight, he shook his head. Foolish creature you are. This time Malagos did attempt another escape. He flew around Tyr, going such a great distance to the side of the cloaked figure that Kalik could not help but wonder if the proto-dragon also sensed that while Tyr appeared tiny, he was in actuality something far larger, far greater. Kalik and his host both expected Tyr to materialize before them, but there was no sign. While Malagos took heart from this, Kalik could not fathom why Tyr would simply let the proto-dragon go. Suddenly, what appeared to be a wall stood before the racing Malagos. He managed to bank at the last moment, and as he did, something unsettling about the wall registered with both the proto-dragon and Kalik. It was not a wall, but the torso of some gigantic two-legged form. But as Malagos spun back, he found no giant, only Tyr. Still, even the young proto-dragon understood that he had caught a glimpse of what Tyr truly was. That glimpse was powerful enough to make him eye the tiny creature once more, standing before him with something near awe. But Tyr's expression extinguished Malagos' obvious hope that what the proto-dragon had momentarily seen could mean Galakron's defeat. We are not tied to this world as your kind is. The others of my kind cannot be urged any more to face this danger. We have grown too weary from our past battles. I need your kind, Malagos. I need you. Still hovering, the proto-dragon finally nodded. What can we do? Tyr looked vastly relieved. First, we must gather your friends. Together, I think they could be the answer. Nowhere else have I seen this immediate, intricate bonding amongst those of different proto-dragon families. Perhaps it might, ironically, even have something to do with Galakron's coming. I don't know. Whatever the reason, this bonding may be the key to the only chance of victory still left to us. Some of the words were, again, more than Malagos could comprehend. However, he could easily detect Tyr's uncertainty that even Malagos and his kind would be enough to prevent Galakron from ravaging Azeroth. Gather the others, Malagos. They trust you. Lead them here. I will be waiting. A warning roar echoed from the east, a roar so thundering it could only belong to Galakron. Tyr turned at the cry. Malagos's gaze swept past him to look in the same direction, and in that moment the cloak swung aside, revealing something that only Kalik noticed and only Kalik would have recognized. Attached by netting to a thick silver belt was nothing less than the artifact itself. Even as Kalik saw this, the scene turned on its head, and its elements shattered, scattering in all directions. The blackness held sway for but a second before the elements regathered and formed a new scene. Proto-dragons filled the sky. By the scores, they roared their challenges at the horizon before them. As Kalik sought to identify what was happening, Malagos joined in the others in seemingly challenging the empty air. The sky answered. Galakron, still so distant that he could not be seen, answered. Kalik silently swore. Somehow he, or rather Malagos, had become part of Talanix's grand and likely doomed charge, after all. Jaina woke with a start, her head snapping up from the pages of the musty book she was reading when exhaustion had claimed her. The Archmage eyed the faint moisture on one page and gestured with some slight irritation. The page dried, none the worse for the wear. Another waste of time. She pointed her finger at the wall of books and parchments. The books fluttered to the spot from which she had summoned it. Thoughts other than her own abruptly filled her head. Messages sent by various magi seeking her advice or reminding her of tasks she should have been working on instead of this increasingly futile quest. Jaina knew that her position demanded that she deal with these other matters, but she rose from her chair and once more approached the trove of magical knowledge. Before she could make a decision, another voice overwhelmed the rest. Jaina, come quickly. Kalik? The contact broke, but not before she sensed from where he was calling. The location surprised her, but the Archmage did not hesitate. She exhaled and cast. Her arrival did not go as expected. She appeared not only many yards from where she had intended, but also more than a foot above the ground. The Archmage landed hard on her heels, the collision vibrating through her bones. Biting back an epithet worthy of her naval father, Jaina focused. Regaining her equilibrium, she surveyed the dark land before her, wondering why Kalik would call her to, of all places, the Dragon Blight. Moreover, the Archmage wondered why he would summon her not from the temple, but from the shadows of the incredibly vast skeleton ahead. Jaina knew of the huge bones that had once been a behemoth called Galakron, but there her knowledge faded into what myths and legends the aspects had passed along over the millennia. When they did speak of Galakron, dragons made vague comments honoring him as the father of dragons. It was supposedly why so many of those dragons who came to die in the Dragonblight chose to set their bodies, if not facing Galakron, then certainly in the vicinity of his skeleton. Jaina concentrated on Kalik, silently calling his name and awaiting a link with his mind. When that did not happen, she sharpened her call by directing it toward the monstrous rib cage. But although there came no answer, Jaina could not help feeling that the skeleton was where she needed to go. A fear abruptly rose in her that Kalik might now lie injured and unconscious, or even worse, somewhere within the half-buried bones. A haze draped over the region, making it impossible for the Archmage to see anything inside the ribs. She probed with her power, but found nothing. No, just for a moment, Jaina thought she sensed Kalik. Without hesitation, she transported herself nearer. This time the Archmage appeared where she desired. The ribs loomed over her, but of Kalik there was still no sign. Jaina finally called his name. The only answer was the growing wind blowing through the bones. Aware that her destination had been this desolate place, using magic, she had shielded herself from the expected cold, and so the chill ran down her spine had nothing to do with the elements. Despite that, though, the Archmage did not hesitate to enter. The moment she did, she sensed something else, a faint magical trace that reminded her of the artifact's aura. The source of the trace proved to be a hole dug deep into the frozen ground, a hole that also radiated hints of Calic's unique magical signature. This is where he found it, Jaina realized. He went through a lot of trouble to dig it out. Why? She looked over her shoulder, suddenly certain that she was not alone. Even though the Archmage saw nothing, she could not shake the feeling. Still, she returned to her inspection of the hole. Searching beyond Calic's trace, Jaina studied the residue of ancient magic continuing to permeate the area. It grew stronger the more she delved into the hole itself. The Archmage marveled at the efforts Calic had used to free the artifact. And again came the question of why. The shadows around her deepened. Jaina created a small golden sphere and set it into the hole to better see anything. An exasperated sigh escaped her. She glanced around again, seeking either Calic or some other figure. Jaina now knew that she was being led, but whether this was all a trap or something far different, the spellcaster could not say. Thus far, she detected no threat, but she also detected no reason for her being here. Her sphere changed color without warning, turning from gold to a deep blue. And in that blue light, Jaina Probmore saw something not evident before. It was not a physical object, but a force somehow tied to the relic that had been buried here. It was also something that she had seen once before, and that she knew was recorded in the very tomes through which she had been burrowing before, thinking she heard Calic's summons. The artifact itself at last began to make some sense to the Archmage, but this only fueled her concern. If what she sensed about the magics involved its creation were true, if what this radiant force meant to her study of the artifact was true, then there was something terrible going on that... Again, Jaina felt as someone watching her. This time she quickly cast a spell behind her, and for her efforts she was rewarded with a slight grunt. Spinning around, she discovered a female Tonka standing only a few feet from her. "Who are you?" the Archmage demanded. "Bunique. My name is Bunique," the Tonka rasped. Jaina's spell held the creature in pace. The Tonka was armed with a spear, but Jaina saw that the weapon was held casually and had not been readied for throwing. "What are you doing here?" "Hunting. Saw the light. Thought it was another hunter." The Archmage could detect nothing amiss and finally released Tonka. Bunique inhaled and stretched her arms, although she was also careful to keep her grip on the spear loose at all times. "You're free to go," Jaina remarked, her tone indicating that she would prefer Bunique did as she suggested. The Tonka started to turn and glanced past the spellcaster at the hole. He searched there too. The blue one. The blue one? Calic? Jaina's mind raced. Before the Archmage could ask, the hunter abruptly added, "He found something, I think." While the information was of some relevance to Jaina, it did not resolve anything for her. She nodded her thanks, her interest in the Tonka fading. "Saw something else after he left." Jaina stared at her. "What did you see? What?" Bunique hesitated. "Saw another. All covered." "All covered? A cloak?" After Bunique bent her head forward in what was evidently a nod, the Archmage, now very much interested again, asked, "You could make out nothing else about this figure?" "Tall. Taller than you. Looked into the hole, just like you." There had been no magical trace from some other spellcaster, at least none that Jaina had detected. With her skill, it was unlikely that she would have failed to notice that another beach had been there, unless she needed to know more. Did this figure do anything? Yes. Bunique thought for a moment, then carefully passed the spear from one thick hand to the other. She raised her now free hand and began to draw something in the air. Once finished, the Tonka stilled again. Jaina tried to make sense of what Bunique had done, but could not completely recall it. Draw it again, but slower. As Bunique began, the Archmage cast a simple but useful spell. Immediately the air flared silver where the Tonka had started drawing. The Hussar hesitated. Go on, please, Bunique. Exhaling, the Tonka obeyed. The silver fire followed as she completed the symbol. Jaina watched with ever-increasing interest, all the while hoping that Bunique had a very sharp memory. The Tonka stepped back. Jaina summoned the glowing pattern to her, examined it for a second, and then with a grimace, turned it around so that she saw it as Bunique had. A crescent star overlooking a stylized bird greeted her, both bound in the center by 3 simple but significant runes of triangular shape. The Archmage gasped. She had seen this symbol before, and she recalled just where. Returning her attention to Bunique, Jaina asked, Was there anything else? The Tonka was gone. Jaina squinted and saw a few tracks leading off behind the rib cage. She should have expected that a hunter would be skilled in moving stealthily, but not only had Bunique evaded the Archmage's enhanced senses, but she had done so with astonishing swiftness. Moreover, Jaina had no idea why Bunique had left without warning, although perhaps the simple fact that Jaina was a spellcaster was answer enough. She dismissed the Tonka from her thoughts. Jaina needed to return to the books immediately. It was possible that this clue would be nothing more than a dead end, but from what the Archmage already recalled of the pages she intended to hunt down again, she doubted that would be the case. Her hopes rising, Jaina silently thanked the absent Bunique for having still been in the region hunting, then cast a spell to return herself to her sanctum. But had the Archmage chosen to glance once more at where the Tonka had stood, she might have this time noticed there were no hoofprints anywhere. Knaak did not recall so many proto-dragons collected at the previous gatherings. Their numbers were staggering. Through Malagos, he saw more family patterns than he had known existed among the proto-dragons. Even Malagos appeared somewhat awed by the legions around him, although it quickly became clear that he was there not because he wanted to be there, but because Tyr had asked him to be. The others were also present, but scattering amongst the many. Even Ysera was there, having been located by Alexstrasza in a narrow ravine riddled with small caves. Malagos's thoughts constantly went to Ysera, who appeared to be a tremendous question mark in whatever Tyr had planned with the 5. Malagos's concern over Ysera overwhelmed Knaak's ability to understand what the plan involved. From what Knaak could sense about Ysera, the others believed that she hid some secret from them, something she would not even speak of to Alexstrasza. Ysera had too readily agreed to come with them, as if eager to be away from the area in which they had found her. All of that left Malagos wondering if the pale yellow female would suddenly abandon the attack just as the critical moment for whatever she kept from them. Fragmented memories concerning Tyr revealed a surprise to Knaak. His host was still the one who knew the cloaked figure. Tyr wanted to work through Malagos, believing that it would be best if the others thought that it was the icy blue male who had come up with the plan. Knaak gathered that the reason for the secrecy had to do with something Tyr had not revealed even to Malagos, perhaps some portion of the plan that Knaak's host might have rejected. And not at all to his surprise, Malagos suspected something similar. Telenica roared again, her cry the signal for a new chorus of challenges focused on the yet unseen Galakron. In truth, the collective roar seemed as impressive to Kalik as that of a distant behemoth, and he began to wonder if perhaps Telenica had chosen the right course of action after all. Out of the corner of his eye, Malagos watched Ysera suddenly drop below the rest. He immediately dived after her. She looked up at him as he neared, her eyes narrowed. Malagos' suspicion of trouble heightened. "Stay with us," he called. "We must lead the others high." "Only resting. Tired." It was true that Ysera did not have the stamina of the others, and that there had been little time for her to rest since Malagos had gathered his companions and told them of his plan. But the male remained distrustful. Fortunately for him, Alexstrasza chose that moment to join them. "You are well?" she anxiously asked her sister. "Just tired." Ysera seemed no happier to see Alexstrasza than she had been to see Malagos. "I will stay with you until we need to rise higher." Alexstrasza gave Malagos a glance of dismissal. The male quickly veered away from the sisters. The fire-orange female will keep a proper eye on Ysera. The plan Tyr had suggested could still. A roar 100 times more resounding shook both the land and the air. The great formation created by Telenica briefly lost order. She snarled furiously at her followers, bringing them back in line. Yet still there was no sign of Galakron. Telenica laughed. "You see, he fears us." It was the moment that Malagos had been waiting for, and thus it was also the moment when his thoughts on the plan grew clearer for Kalik. Height. The plan involved height. Tyr knew something about Galakron that the proto-dragons did not. The higher up, the thinner the air. That much even Malagos knew. However, the limit to how high Galakron could fly for more than a few minutes was lower than that of the smaller flyers. The key to victory lay in drawing the monsters up where he would grow more sluggish, be forced to gasp for the air he needed to fill his massive lungs. At that point, and perhaps only at that point, Galakron would be vulnerable. The icy blue male came up beside Telenica. "Must fly high, very high. Galakron cannot fly high long, cannot breathe well there." The opposing female snorted. "Away!" "Fly high," Malagos insisted. "Galakron cannot breathe well there. We'll tire. We'll fail." This time Telenica appeared to consider his suggestion. Tyr and Malagos had counted on her cunning to enable this plan to work. Malagos exhaled in relief. It was a mistake. Telenixa's expression hardened. Both Kalik and his host realized that she took Malagos's reaction for satisfaction at her having to bow to his wisdom. She snapped at Malagos. Simultaneously, 2 of her lieutenants dived in to aid her. As if out of nowhere, Neltharion and Nosdormu joined Malagos. Neltharion let out a challenging roar, which was answered by both of Telenica's followers. Behind the 6, the rest of the proto-dragons faltered, uncertain whether their charge had now turned into a war amongst their own members. "Retreat!" Nosdormu hissed to Malagos. "Retreat!" Neltharion also heard the other males warning. "No! Fight her! Become Alpha! Command all!" Unlike Nosdormu, Neltharion had not bothered to be quiet. His words sent Telenica into a rage. She unleashed the bolt not at Neltharion, but at the trio's apparent leader, Malagos. Kalik's host twisted, but still received a painful scorching on one wing. As he did, more of Telenica's most loyal followers joined. "Retreat!" Nosdormu urged once more. Malagos did not dive, as might have been expected, but rather pushed higher. His comrades followed without question, and behind them several Telenica's acolytes pursued. But the pursuers stopped short in an abrupt snarl from the female. As Malagos continued rising higher, He glanced down to see the formation tightening again. He had hoped that Talanixa and her lieutenants would give chase, possibly leading the rest of the proto-dragons upward after all. Momentum pushed Malagos into the clouds. Flying became more of a strain as the air thinned. He paused, waiting for the other two to catch up. Knew this would fail, Notherian rumbled. Told you. Malagos did not answer. Kalik sensed that there had been more complexity to Tyr's plan and that Malagos silently berated himself for misplaying the situation. Based on what he could read of his host's thoughts, Kalik could find no fault in the proto-dragon's actions, but the blue dragon knew that there were still things were still hidden from him. What now? Nostormo asked. Follow from above, Malagos told them. Alexstrasza, Ysera, they join soon. In truth, Malagos had some doubts about Ysera's resolve, but he was certain that Alexstrasza would bring her sister along. Kalik saw that his host also had a secondary plan in mind, still based on Tyr's original notions. Already aware that Talanixa might not listen to reason, Malagos had suggested that the five of them could yet lure Galakrond up by attacking him from above. It was a more desperate hope, but still a hope. Glancing down, Nostormo muttered, They move on. As he warned, the proto-dragons below were already far ahead. Malagos saw no signs of the sisters, but could not delay. He would have to trust in Alexstrasza. Come! Not bothering to wait, the icy blue male flew through the clouds after Talonixa's legions. In order to keep her followers together and not too exhausted to fight Galakrond, the female had to set a pace that some of the slower fighters could keep. Malagos soon not only caught up to those below, but also began to pass them. The clouds thickened ahead. Malagos did not fear finding Galakrond among them. The gargantuan fiend could have never hidden his bulk in the clouds, no matter how dense they became. Unfortunately, as he pressed, Kalik's host began to flag for the very reason that he had tried to convince Talanixa to lead the others up. The thin air had his breathing becoming more and more ragged. He had not intended to fly this much above the ground until almost upon Galakrond, but now he wanted to avoid being seen by Talanixa or her followers. Neltharia caught up to him. He too looked to be struggling for air. Must fly lower. Something collided with Neltharion. The proto-dragon went flying backwards, the momentum of the thing that had flown into him sending the charcoal gray male hurling uncontrollably. Malagos immediately turned about, hoping that it was not too late to help his friend. Only then did he see what had struck Neltharion as one of the not living. Indeed, its stench spread through the thin air as it and the living proto-dragon tumbled together. Curiously, Malagos noted that the undead seemed to have collided with Neltharion at an angle that made any attack of consequence initially impossible. It dawned on both Kalik and his host that the animated corpse had not actually attacked Neltharion, but rather had simply run into him by accident in the dense clouds. In fact, the undead almost seemed more interested in flying on than in fighting. Neltharion evidently noticed this too, for he pushed himself away from the monster and let it move on. The undead slowly began circling back the way it had come, or it would have if Neltharion had not taken advantage of its ignorance of him by ripping its neck out from behind and tearing both wings with his powerful high claws. The charcoal gray proto-dragon watched with amusement as the sundered parts dropped. Malagos and Nostormo rejoined him. Stupid creature, Neltharion mocked. Brain all rot. Not even see or fight now. Strange, Nostormo murmured. Malagos and Kalik very much agreed with Nostormo's distinct assessment. Malagos's gaze followed the estimated path the undead would have taken had Neltharion not destroyed it. An uneasy feeling filled the Calyx's host. "Follow," he hissed. Quickly but carefully, Malagos pushed higher despite the increasing desire to drop to thicker air. So pressed was the proto-dragon that Calyx could not at first fathom what so bothered him. And then, as they reached a slight break within the cloud cover, what Malagos had feared became evident to his unseen companion. The sky was filled with undead. They circled constantly as if that was the only desire left in their putrefying brains. Over and over they circled, some in great arcs, some in tight ones. One flew much too near Malagos, but did not take any notice of him. Neltharion and Nostormu caught up with him, and even the charcoal-gray male appeared stunned. So many, almost as many as us. There had been a few sightings of the undead, but in the growing anticipation of battling Galakrond, the living proto-dragons had not paid that much mind, not even Malagos. Now that lapse was coming back to haunt them. Why here? Why do they just fly circles? Nostormu asked. Calyx knew, and so did Malagos. They wait. For us. For all of us. They wait? Neltharion shook his head. They not smart. No thinking. Malagos nodded. The undead proto-dragon had no true minds, but something they were bound to did. No, Galakrond's smart. Galakrond thinks. He thinks very well. It was a frustratingly uncomplicated way of phrasing it, but Calyx saw that somehow the other two understood what Malagos tried to convey. As for the dragon, he shared both his host's astonishment and his growing fear. The undead were circling because they were indeed waiting for the living to pass underneath them. They had not planned it themselves. Galakrond had. Through the same foulness that mutated him, this monstrous proto-dragon also now appeared to control his victims, and he was using them to set a trap of his own that would engulf everyone. Must warn all, Malagos shouted as best as the air permitted. Must. As one, the undead ceased their circling and dived. Malagos and Calyx could only watch in horror. The discovery had come too late. The trap had been sprung. So, I'm taking a little side note here. Yeah, this is necromantic magic. Later on, when Kalia was asking about how the light reanimated her, she was told that necromantic magic was just a tool. It's just a thing to use. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing that exists that is able to be done. And that anyone can use it. So Tyr is actually explaining something that he did with Galakrond because he was one of those proto-dragons that could think and reason. And for some reason, Tyr was looking at them. Well, I mean, we know why. But Tyr was looking at them for a particular reason, for a particular, shall we say, as I say it, a purpose. So he did something, and it ended up turning Galakrond into a monster and turn him kind of necrotic. I'm not sure if the book actually has Tyr explain what did he do to mess this up. But yeah, the Galakrond right now is showing some Lich King tendencies here by being able to link to the undead proto dragons and command them. So here's your first signs of the Lich King and the ability behind it. And this is without a crown or anything. This is a mistake that Tyr made. Interesting. It may also This may also tie in with when Tyr elevates the five into the aspects. I wonder if he bungles that up again to the point that he knows that they're going to be corrupted eventually because maybe they just can't handle it. I don't know. Oh, we're done with that part. Okay, so we need to go to book. No, we're in book 4. Hang on 1 second. Let me pop out and get book 4 up. Yeah, Titans don't know shit either. There it is. 4. All right. There we go. Let's wander on. All right, we're on book 5. This comes in 5 books. They're like mini novels. They're like the old serials of old. So these came out monthly a long while ago. We're coming to the end, but you know, we still got a bit to go. So we're at part 4. As Malagos dived in what he, and thus Kalec, knew to be a futile attempt to warn those below, the proto-dragon tried to think of what could be done to avoid the disaster looming. Tried and failed. The catastrophic scene in which Malagos found himself was even worse than Kalec and he imagined. Above a suddenly scattering legion, the undead spread out with a precision their mindless forms were clearly incapable of on their own. Galakrond controlled them all, even from a distance. Malagos searched the front of the growing disarray and saw to his shock that Talanixa and her closest followers did not yet know the catastrophe developing behind them. Talanixa herself flew with utter confidence, and Malagos, very familiar with the arrogant female, had no doubt that she still exalted her cleverness. Big Galakrond might be, but proto-dragons have taken down larger prey than themselves by working together. Galakrond was just very large prey. All Talanix's followers had to do was stay clear of his jaws, and they would eventually slay him. True, several of the others might perish accomplishing that feat, but as Talanixa no doubt did not think she would be one of those, the great golden female was willing to accept the sacrifices. But before Malagos could fly within calling distance, the rising hisses and roars from behind Talanixa at last shattered her reverie. With a reprimanding expression on her face, she looked over her shoulder, just as the shriveled corpse of a proto-dragon of a hue that once matched her own attacked. Surprise did not keep Talanixa from reacting. She exhaled immediately. The lightning bolt burst through the undead's dry hide, the cadaverous body exploding into flames. Twisting, Talanixa evaded the fragments, and in doing so, she found herself facing the collapse of her great charge. Curiously, her gaze cut through the chaos to fix upon the swiftly approaching Malagos. The glare she gave him almost made it appear to both Kalik and his host that the female blamed Malagos for all of this. "Beware!" Netherian shouted, barreling past his friend. Two undead just dropping down upon Malagos from the side collided with the charcoal gray male. Why am I saying mare for some reason? Okay, I'm tired. Roaring cheerfully, Netherian ripped through one undead, sending the pieces scattering, then exhaled on the second. The shockwave, he admitted, literally shook the corpse apart. But for all the ease with which both of these and the one attacking Talanixa perished, there appeared to Malagos to be far too many of the not living in the sky, and surprise had given them a savage advantage. Neither Kalik nor his host could imagine that Galakron still completely controlled his cadaverous servants. Now they simply followed the one urge remaining in them, to engulf the living. A brown female, turning too late, became caught in the clutches of a blackened corpse that then exhaled on her. Thick green fumes enveloped the female's head and throat. She shrieked as the affected flesh dried and crumbled. Her anguished cry became a fading gurgle as her head first dropped to the side, then broke off. Even this did not stop the undead, which then began with its teeth to rip apart the bloody areas at the base of the neck and swallow large gobbets of still warm flesh. To Malagos's far right, two undead caught a fire-orange male between them. The male let loose with a brief blast of flame, which set one of the undead ablaze. Unfortunately, it was not enough to keep that corpse from continuing its own assault, forcing the flames on the male even as the second undead snapped at his neck from the opposite direction. Malagos raced to the aid of the other male, but before he could reach the battling trio, the flames from the burning corpse spread to the living proto-dragon and to his other foe. Trapped within the fire, the male succumbed quickly. Outraged at his own failure, Malagos ignored the risks to himself and joined in the fray. He exhaled on the undead's victim, with the faint hope that the other male still lived, urging him to cover the trio with his icy breath. His impetuous attack only served to smother many of the flames eating at the undead, enabling them now to turn on to Malagos. Realizing his mistake, Kalik's host raised his hind paws and ripped at the wings of the nearest, even as it opened wide its withered maw. The dry, scorched wings readily tore, sending the undead falling before it could unleash a blast of the sinister decaying gas. The body of the fire-orange male also dropped as the second undead focused entirely on Malagos. Yet barely had it done so when another familiar form came in from behind and ripped through the animated corpse's back. Nosdormu gave Malagos a short nod before moving on. Kalik knew that Malagos could have dealt with the second undead, but the timely act by Nosdormu freed his host for whatever they and the other male knew was the priority. Malagos continued on down to Talanixa, who hovered in place, blasting at one rotting figure after another. "Must beware," he roared. "Galakron does this! Galakron does this!" Talanixa managed to sneer at him even as she exhaled again. Another corpse exploded. "Galakron still dies," she declared. "He still dies." Kalik had never seen true madness in a proto-dragon before, but he could describe the intimidating female's attitude as only that, and Malagos's opinion leaned in the same direction. Talanixa could see nothing but her imminent triumph. The attack by the undead was, to her, simply a delay. As if to emphasize this, Talanixa utterly dismissed Malagos from her attention and darted up to seize a foe that had just finished biting through the throat of a smaller male. Talanixa first ripped off the wings and then, for good measure, clamped her mouth around the rotting jaws and pulled the head from the top of the neck with little effort. She almost seemed to revel in her act, which to Malagos was an unnecessary waste of precious time. In frustration, he looked in search of Neltharion and instead noticed Ysera moving on from the struggle. After a moment, Malagos realized what Kalik had known immediately. Ysera was heading in the direction of Galakron. With an aggravated hiss, Malagos raced after her. Of Alexstrasza there was no sign, but neither Kalik nor Malagos expected that Ysera had left her sister in danger. Indeed, Alexstrasza would have been in more trouble if she had also to concern herself with the nearby presence of weaker Ysera. Unfortunately, that meant Alexstrasza was ignorant of what her sibling intended. Ysera sought to speak peace with Galakron. Reason demanded that Malagos leave her to her fate, but loyalty urged him on. Wings beating hard, he began to catch up to the smaller sister. Malagos knew that he still did not fly fast enough. Galakron was surely near and drawing nearer. He had to know that this creature had done their work and that bedlam reigned. While several proto-dragons had perished, there were many, many more left to feed Galakron's tremendous appetite. And this was the monster Ysera sought to reason with. Kalik urged his host forward, even though Malagos not only could not hear him, but also was going as fast as possible. Ahead of them, Ysera vanished over a low rise, and when Malagos reached that same point, he discovered her trail suddenly gone. The male paused in confusion and then saw Ysera darting around another low hill. Relief combined with fear that she was nearing her goal and thus soon to face the same fate as Koros. Malagos pushed hard, but now the gap did not close. To both Calyx and Malagos' surprise, Galakron still did not appear. While in one obvious way that was to Malagos' benefit, in another it did not bode well. The gargantuan proto-dragon would certainly not have abandoned his plan at this point. Whatever the reason for Galakron's absence, Malagos knew that he could not count on it for very long. Unable to catch up to Ysera, he finally dared call out to her. And no sooner had Malagos done that, the ground ahead erupted. Yet here was no place of volcanic pits. The ground in this region was rocky, uneven. Kalik once more recognized what it took the young Malagos a moment more to understand. The landscape was rocky and uneven for one very good reason. Galakron had burrowed deep, no doubt beginning from some more distant cavern, and had secreted himself just below the surface, waiting. He waited no longer. Tons of rock and dirt flew up as the malformed Leviathan burst free. Malagos gazed at Galakron with new dismay. Not only was he larger, but he was also more misshapen. His entire body was covered in growths, some of them simply lumps, other fully formed parts. Many of the latter twitched. Eyes surveyed the world in every direction, but most fixed upon the tiny figure now heading directly toward Galakron. So, as an aside, those eyes that are looking around and twitching, kind of looking around like that, that's N'Zoth. So I think, so if something went wrong with Tyr trying to talk to Galakron about something, that Galakron just end up taking a deal with the Void Lords? I'm not sure. All right, just an aside. Yeah, we're gonna continue on. But another proto-dragon, sleek and fire orange, suddenly dived from above and seized Ysera just as Galakron took a snap at the yellowish female. Alexstrasza, her side seething from effort, continued to push her sister farther and farther from Galacrond. The behemoth turned after the sisters, in the process shaking more stone and dirt from his gigantic body. Malagos and Kalik both knew that in rising now, Galacron would be visible to Anixa and the rest, assuming that the defenders had any chance to pay mind to anything other than the undead. Galacron obviously had planned to fall under the embattled proto-dragon, but at the moment his attention was taken by Ysera's seemingly suicidal act. Galacron left a wide valley where once there was a shallow cavern. As he took to the air, a rain of fragments battered the ground in its wake. Malagos hesitated. Ysera and Alexstrasza were in desperate straits, but this was the one opportunity to try to save those under assault. Not for the first time, loyalty struggled with other considerations. This time, those other considerations won. The fate of many was in the balance, as opposed to that of the two sisters. Malagos turned around. He frowned. Neltharion and Nosdormu closing with him. The pair hovered as he neared, Neltharion looking perplexed and Nosdormu looking contemplative. "They're not living," Malagos called. "Must destroy them now, quickly." If it involved a fight, Neltharion was all for it. Nosdormu molded over for a second, then responded, "Yes, must be now." Malagos led them back. Kalik was nearly overwhelmed by the thoughts racing through the supposedly primitive mind of his host. More than ever, Kalik saw the Malagos to come, the planner and calculator. Malagos thought of and discarded more than half a dozen viable plans before the trio reached the chaos, and only made his final choice when he could think of nothing better to do. A quick glance at the battle verified that what the icy blue male had assumed. There was no visible sign of any remaining control on Galacron's part. The undead attacked with the relentless urge with which Kalik was familiar. There was no coordination, not even as much as when Malagos had left. "Come," he roared to his two companions. "Fly high! Lead others to the clouds!" As he obeyed, Malagos veered off towards another male proto-dragon. Malagos slammed into an undead with which the other male was fighting, then had the rescued proto-dragon join him. The pair successfully freed a third and a fourth proto-dragon, females, from the struggle. Malagos shouted, "Tell all, fly high! Fly into clouds until almost top, then fly north 10 beats. Drop!" The rest soared away, shrieking for all to hear as they separated. Within seconds, living proto-dragons everywhere began to head up into the clouds. Close behind came the hungry corpses. A few proto-dragons did not make good their escape, but there was nothing Malagos could do but hope that their losses would mean that others would arrive at the clouds. There were some proto-dragons who did not fly as Malagos suggested. Far in the distance, Anixa hesitated, her chief followers awaiting her decision despite the precarious circumstances. She glanced at another proto-dragon who approached her, and who, by her gesture upward with one wing, was clearly informing the lead female of Malagos's suggestion. However, after scanning the chaos one more time, Anixa let out a commanding bellow and soared after the rest of the defenders. Seeing that there was no more that could be done, Malagos himself surged into the clouds. He estimated the pace of the defenders as a whole and thought he had guessed correctly. Kayla could find no major fault with Malagos's estimates, although they were certainly not be perfect. Another live proto-dragon flew past Malagos. 3 wing beats later, the other flyer dived. Malagos counted his own 10th beat, then did the same. As he broke out of the bottom of the cloud cover, Kalik's host saw that a good many survivors were in the process of following suit. A few of the undead still hovered among them, but proto-dragons, led by Neltharion, were making short work of them. That had not been part of Malagos's plan, but Neltharion's effort only increased the chances of success. The moment he was far enough below the clouds, Malagos roared loudly. He had the attention of nearly all those gathered. Without another word, he faced the clouds above and opened his maw wide. He took one more quick glance at the others. Both Malagos and Kalik were pleased to see understanding spread across the rows. Another proto-dragon dropped out of the clouds, but this one was skeletal and had vacant... Oh, hang on. But this one was skeletal and had vacant thought, somehow still hungered eyes. That was the sentence, okay. Malagos exhaled as hard as he could, aiming foremost for the wings. As he had hoped, the stiffening appendages sent his would-be attacker hurtling to the ground. All around, other defenders struck as soon as an undead appeared. Malagos had turned Galakron's original plan around to his advantage. Without Galakron, the undead could only follow their urge, which meant that they could not understand that a trap had been set. They chased their prey into the clouds, then followed back down, but more slowly. This time, prepared for attackers above, the waiting proto-dragons decimated the unliving. The defenders exerted themselves as much as they could, amplifying their attacks. Columns of sand, spouts of water, plumes of flame, and other proto-dragon weapons shattered the dry, emaciated forms. Despite incurring terrible damage, some undead managed to evade complete destruction long enough to attack. But as they did, Neltharion led those who had earlier followed him into a new assault on the remaining corpses. Malagos observed this out of the corner of his eye, even as he took on another undead. Kalik's host first focused on the head, and then, before his horrific foe recovered, bit through the neck. As Malagos let the pieces fall their separate ways, Kalik sensed the insidious urge filling the young proto-dragon. Malagos quickly fought it down again. Still, Kalik could feel how much the effort cost Malagos and knew that if something did not happen soon, the proto-dragon might yet succumb. Victorious roars began to resound through the ranks of the survivors. Talanixa's roar was the loudest of all, as if she were the one who had brought about this triumph. Malagos snarled, wondering how they could not see past this moment. Nothing had been won but a reprieve. Indeed, if not for Ysera's foolhardy act. Kalik's host hissed. The sisters were probably dead now, and Malagos felt in great part responsible. Even though he knew that they would have expected him to do as he had, the deep regret still remained. Nosdorma rose before him. Good plan! Quick! Done well! The other male's exuberance faded. But Talanixa claims victory is hers. Much to Malagos' surprise, not only did Nosdorma speak the truth, but many of the other proto-dragons appeared to believe her. More and more began flocking near her, the golden female's grand and reckless crusade taking shape despite Malagos' belief. No! He cried, streaking down toward Talanixa. No! This is not right! Her eyes disdainful, Talanixa opened her mouth wide. Even though Malagos instantly understood what she intended and moved to evade, the bolt still struck him almost squarely. His entire body shook, and both he and Kalik suffered incredible torment. Blackness nearly overtook them, but Kalik knew it was not the same blackness that meant a return to his own body and the present. With Malagos, he spiraled to his doom, half aware through the entire drop that he could do nothing to stop the end. Claws suddenly dug deep into his hind legs. The pain was minor in comparison with the shock from the bolt, but it served to give Kalik and his host something else to focus on. They felt their descent slow, and as it did, consciousness began to take a better hold. It was not Nosdorma, as might have been expected, but rather Neltharion. For a change, the charcoal gray male did not have a cheerful expression. Fury filled Notharian's countenance, and for a moment it unnerved even Malagos and especially Kalik, who caught a brief glimpse of something akin to the future Deathwing. Foul female, Notharian roared. Saw that! She will pay! No, Malagos croaked. Must all be one. Must! To survive. Talanix's roar cut through Malagos's words. As Calyx's host flapped his wings and righted himself, Neltharion finally released his hold. Both gazed upon the reformed legion, which to Calyx's observance was a quarter less than it had been. Malagos noted that also. If there was any hope he had to find a way to make a workable alliance with Talanixa, only then would the proto-dragons have a chance of. Galakron's roar thundered across the sky. Talanixa answered her savage cry, sounding meeker and weak to Kalik and Malagos. She roared again, and this time the other proto-dragons behind her joined in. To their credit, while they did not shake the heavens as Galakron had, their united challenge was very impressive. The horizon in the direction from which the great roar had come seemed to swell. The swelling grew and then separated from the ground. As it did, the shape of a huge proto-dragon coalesced. Galakron again issued his challenge. The gathered defenders answered in kind. Must not. Before Malagos could finish what he wanted to say, the vision shifted. The shift caught Kalik by surprise, more so because it had clearly been only a matter of moments. But those few moments left him now in the middle of the savage struggle against Galakron. The titanic fiend hovered, surrounded by darting proto-dragons that to Calyx's eye seemed more like mosquitoes in comparison. They veered around below and above Galakron, striking with a barrage of attacks that stunned Kalik with both their intensity and their variety. Acidic burns and scorch marks already dotted the enormous torso, and several of the extra limbs were either hung limply or had been ripped apart. Kalik watched through Malagos's eyes as a brown and black female rushed in, seized a flailing hind leg in her jaws, and bit through flesh and bone. She quickly turned off again, taking with her all but a bloody stump. Talanixa and her most trusted companions assailed the head, their withering attack forcing Galakron to keep his gaze downward. The golden female let loose with a powerful bolt that left a blackened mark just above one of the Leviathan's original eyes. Kalik watched with awe. Galakron was at bay. Here was the end to the gargantuan fiend. But this place is wrong, Kalik realized. This is not where the bones rest. What could... It only occurred to him then that despite his close proximity to the battle, Malagos was not part of it. Neither were Nostormu and Neltharion. Their hesitation made Kalik turn to Malagos's thoughts, something he had not done in the face of such a spectacle. And there Kalik saw that what he believed to be an imminent victory was anything but. With Malagos's mind to guide him, Kalik realized that all the wounds, all the damage to body and limbs, none of those slowed Galakron in the least. As many as they were, the wounds were merely annoyances. Kalik's initial impression of the defenders as seemingly mosquitoes was still closer to the truth. Well, Neltharion rumbled, ever the most impatient. The eyes, Malagos murmured. To Nostormu, he repeated. The eyes. The eyes, the brown proto-dragon agreed. Kalik thought that they meant to attack Galakron's two mammoth eyes, but the tension he felt overtaking Malagos warned him that the three were concerned with something far more dire. Kalik focused carefully on what Malagos observed, understanding only now that he might visually see the same thing as his host, but he did not always comprehend the matters as Malagos did. His host and the others were concentrating not on Galakron's original eyes, but on all those additional ones the trio could see from their vantage point. Those eyes, Kalik realized, moved as if mad at first glance. They looked up, rolled around, gazed down. Not for what Malagos had already deciphered, it would have taken Kalik longer to understand that these orbs moved with a purpose. Each eye was fixed on one thing and one thing alone. Each eye was focused on a particular proto-dragon. Galakrond was not at bay. He was merely waiting. Yeah, that's some Void Lord eyes there. As anytime they show up, they seem to roll around and looking around, but they're actually trying to focus on something. And sometimes they're focusing on you if you see them in places. So, yeah. Disturbing. All right. Jaina sensed someone seeking her the moment she returned to her sanctum. Unfortunately, that someone was none other than Archmage Modera. Modera was one of those Jaina most respected and admired amongst the Magi. She had become a member of the Council of Six long before Jaina, during the Second War, in fact, and many were the times the younger Archmage had turned to Modera for guidance in one subject or another. Instead, Jaina now concentrated on cloaking herself with a spell she hoped would keep her from even Modera's notice. Archmage? The other woman called from outside. That Modera had come in person meant that she had already attempted to locate Jaina by magical means, and had not been pleased by her failure. Jaina had not given it any official notice of her need to depart the city, and as leader she should have at least informed the rest of the Council of Six. Modera was rightly interested in finding her, but even that did not dissuade Jaina from keeping herself hidden, if possible. Archmage, Modera repeated more firmly. Forgive me, are you within? Could not be as simple as the elder woman giving up when she did not receive an answer, Jaina noted. For only a breath later she felt the casting of a subtle spell outside the door. Jaina planted against one wall just beyond the entrance, watched as a transparent form materialized near her. Jaina, the figure coalesced in the image of Modera. Although much older chronologically than Dalaran's leader, she still appeared as a handsome woman with snowy white hair bound in a braid. The image peered around, obviously seeking the sanctum's owner. Forgive this intrusion. I really must speak with you. It said something about the urgency of whatever situation concerned Modera that she would enter Jaina's chambers uninvited, even through illusion. Jaina found no fault with the action, although she did vow that if things normalized she would strengthen her wards. Clearly, Modera was more powerful than ever Jaina had taken her for. The other Archmage frowned. She already faced slightly toward where Jaina stood, but suddenly looked directly at the blonde woman. Just as Jaina was certain that Modera had sensed her, the elder spellcaster turned her head to the opposite wall, eyeing it as much the way she had done where Dalaran's leader hid. Where is she? Modera murmured, more pensive. Where could she have gone at a time like this? Her last question almost made Jaina reveal herself, but then Kalik's exhausted face formed again in her thoughts. Jaina's resolve strengthened, even though a part of her knew that she was choosing emotion over sense. Modera's ghostly image looked over her shoulder as if listening to some other specter yet unseen. Very well, the older Archmage muttered to the air. I will see you shortly. We'll have to consider a different course of action. Turning back to the seemingly empty chamber, Modera raised one hand and began writing in the air. Runes flared before her. Please see me the moment you return. It is urgent. Modera left the words floating in the chamber. She looked around one last time, her eyes only briefly passing over Jaina. and simply disappeared. Jaina waited a moment longer until all trace of Madeira's presence had faded into the distance. The younger Archmage exhaled as she reappeared. She stared at the floating message, swearing to find out what Madeira wanted as soon as she had assured herself of Calic's survival. Returning to her collection, Jaina sought out the tome she needed. That proved more troublesome than the spellcaster had thought. The volume Jaina expected to hold the answers was apparently the wrong one, even though she was certain of her memory. The Archmage set the book aside, then thumbed through another that she had recalled had some associated information. But yet again, her memory contradicted what she discovered in the book. She set the second volume down and eyed the two tomes lying side by side. Holding a hand over each book, Jaina concentrated. A white glow surrounded both hands and spread to the two volumes. The glow was met by a lavender haze surrounding each book. Jaina gasped. She could not say how she knew, but she could tell that what enveloped the tomes was some very old, very subtle spell. It was meant to keep something hidden, presumably the very information the Archmage sought. However, Jaina also sensed a fraying in the spell, as if after so much time the original intent of the casting had begun to be lost. The original intent was lost. Jaina could not help but think that this was also a key to what was happening to Calic. The artifact had been created with some purpose in mind, but she wondered if the exact focus of that purpose had faded with the fraying. It also interested her that these books, clearly written long after the artifact's creation, should react to her so precisely. Somehow the ancient magic had detected her intentions, which meant spellwork of the highest skill. But who would have not only the ability, but also the cunning to track down these tomes, and over such a span of time? Jaina knew that there were, of course, mundane possibilities, such as the High Elves, but for some reason the spellwork did not feel like their work. In fact, it had a feel to it much older than even that venerable race. Her brow wrinkled. She withdrew her hands from the two volumes. Their glow instantly vanished. The Archmage eyed her collection, then hesitantly cast a more generalized version of her spell over the rows of tomes and scrolls. Not entirely to her surprise, every piece in her collection glowed lavender. Jaina immediately delved deeper into the spellwork, and she had begun to suspect the casting included what she thought of as an infection subspell. If there was an object of similar tendencies nearby, in this case a book of magic next to another book of magic, the original spell would spread to that other object. To do it so thoroughly, so successfully, was yet again a sign of how adept the caster had been. Dismissing her own work, Jaina carefully thumbed through one of the two books. With her expert memory, the Archmage verified that everything she expected to find remained where it should have been. As best as she could establish, the spell had changed nothing else. Only what Jaina sought appeared to be affected. The Archmage was not daunted. She had confronted complicated and confounding puzzles of a magical nature before and solved them. She would let no spell defeat her. More to the point, Calic was at stake. To Jaina, nothing else mattered. Galakron remained under heavy assault. A female in Malagos's family exhaled on one of the extra hind limbs, then tore off the frozen appendage before it could warm up again. Another female of silver hue unleashed a shower of what appeared to Calic to be steaming liquid metal. The blue column seared Galakron's thick hide, leaving a festering streak twice as wide as the proto-dragon who had breathed it. Two males had a deep green in color used their larger-than-average hindpaws to rake at the base of the Leviathan's neck. "It is nothing," Malagos growled. "It is all nothing." The eyes, Neltharion suggested. Strike when they follow away. Blind Gallicrond eye after eye. Nostormo snorted. If this many eyes, he responded, holding up one of his tiny forepaws. We attack for more days than we have. The brown male had made a very good, if demoralizing point. With so many extra eyes, even if the trio managed to persuade the other attacking proto-dragons to follow through on such a plan, the time needed was surely far more than Gallicron intended to give them. We must warn Telenixa. Even as Malagos said it, his certainty concerning the futility of trying once more to make the imposing female see sense touched Kalik. Yet Malagos saw no other chance but to try. Next to him, Nostormo let loose with a low, warning hiss. The many, many eyes had suddenly narrowed. Despite being aware of what that might presage, Malagos nevertheless started for Telenixa. He did not get far. Gallicron unleashed a roar that silenced all other proto-dragons and made the sky shake. Several attackers near the gargantuan fiend tumbled uncontrollably from his vicinity. Gallicron exhaled, and the air everywhere filled with a foul mist that reminded the oncoming Malagos much too much of that breathed by the not living. Kalik's host recoiled as the mist rushed toward him. His wings beat as hard as he fought to reverse direction before it was too late. But the mist still caught Malagos. The proto-dragon and his unseen companion awaited the agony that would surely accompany the rotting of Malagos's living flesh. Instead, a powerful lethargy overtook the icy blue male. It touched so deep that even Kalik's thoughts were muddied. To Kalik, it was as if his very life was slowly seeping from him, and he vaguely noticed that Malagos felt the same. Yet some part of the young proto-dragon continued to urge his wings to flap. Malagos exited the mist. The moment he did, both his mind and Kalik's began to clear, and strength started to return. The fear of utter listlessness dwindled. Slow death, Malagos pondered as he tried to comprehend in simpler terms what Kalik recognized the more sophisticated ones. He breathed slow death. His thoughts finally clear enough, Malagos surveyed the horror unfolding before him. A great portion of Talanix's grand charge had been caught within the massive cloud exhaled by Gallicrond. The behemoth's countless eyes had been watching for one thing, the very moment when most of Gallicron's foes would be within range of this new and horrific breath weapon. Some of the stricken proto-dragons tried to turn and flee, while others simply fought to stay aloft. A few could not summon the will to keep their wings flapping and plunge to their doom. But even in the midst of the cloying mist, some proto-dragons still managed more control. Chief among them was Telenixa, who appeared to Malagos to be suffering a different malady, the utter madness Kalik and his host had noted earlier. Telenixa roared over and over, perhaps in part, both Malagos and Kalik believed, to keep herself from falling prey to the mist. She moved not away from Gallicron, but closer to him, challenging him as if the two were the same size and strength. Gallicron laughed, the sound deafening. With a single beat of his wings, he cut the distance between them. Telenixa opened her mouth wide, but this time not a roar, but a bolt of lightning issued forth. It struck Gallicron directly on the snout. It had as much effect of slowing or injuring him as a pebble might have. Now it was the misshapen proto-dragon who opened his maw wide, a maw so great that the mighty Telenixa was but a fly in comparison. The jaws closed upon the female, even as she spun about in a futile attempt to escape. The huge sharp teeth caught Telenixa between them. Gallicron made no attempt to correct his bite. Rather, he shook his head back and forth, violently shaking his prey. Telenixa snapped in vain at the teeth and managed one more bolt, but to no avail. Her head quickly dropped and her wings ceased beating. She still lived, but barely. There was no help from those she had once led. The other proto-dragons could hardly keep in the air or protect themselves, much less come to her aid. Even had they wanted to, Kalik and his host knew that it was already too late. Blood spilled over Telenixa, and her breathing came in gasps. Galakrond ceased shaking her. With barely any effort, he clamped down and bit Telenixa in half. The still twitching upper torso slowly tumbled out of sight, a shower of blood and other life fluids in its wake. With mock disdain, Galakrond unclenched his jaws just enough to let the rest of Telenixa fall free. He laughed then, and with a powerful beat of his wings, moved amongst the lethargic proto-dragons. Mouth opening much wider, Galakrond began to feed. His first victims scarcely seemed to notice their demise. So quickly did the horrific Leviathan swallow them up. 5 vanished in the space of a single breath. Galakrond barely paused, turning to take in 3 more a moment later. "What can we do?" Miltharion growled in frustration. He looked nearly ready to try to defy the mist, despite the obvious result of doing so. Malygos could not blame him for his rising exasperation. Wholesale death played out before them, and none of the 3 could offer any way to put an end to it, not at least without likely committing suicide in the process. Yet Kalik, feeling his host's raging emotions and thoughts, knew that Malygos would have willingly sacrificed himself if it meant stopping the slaughter. Then Malygos noticed something about in the mist. He started forward. "Come!" It said much to Kalik that the other 2 males obeyed. Malygos headed towards the mist and abruptly rose. A faint cloying scent infiltrated his nostrils, immediately causing a slight slowing of his thoughts. The icy blue male took an almost vertical shift in direction, rising several yards before daring to take even the briefest breath. When he did breathe, Malygos found no trace of the scent that pervaded Galakrond's evil fog. Adjusting to a more horizontal path of flight, Kalik's host found the lack of scent continued. He now flew above the mist and its effects. The other 2 males flanked him as he soared towards Galakrond. Intent on his feeding, the gargantuan proto-dragon failed to notice the tiny trio above. Even had he done so, it was doubtful that Galakrond would have seen them as anything but amusing. After all, what could 3 do that hundreds could not? That was a question for which Malygos did not yet have an answer, even as if the 3 reached a spot almost directly above the monster. He peered down at the terrifying tableau, watching as 4 more proto-dragons disappear down Galakrond's gullet. Mist dwindling above, Nostormo offered. "Too slow below, though." "Little wind," Notharian added, sifting air. "Not enough." Malygos continued to study Galakrond. The only real wind was that caused by the enormous wings. They were beginning to scatter the mist, but not soon enough to save the others. A curious thought stirred in Malygos's mind, one that caught Kalik by surprise. Malygos imagined himself when he hunted over the water would dive with great velocity, so as to strike deeper and seize the better prey lurking farther below. His eyes narrowed as he focused on Galakrond's head. "The head," he muttered to his companions. "Breathe little, strike hard." Understanding dawned. Neltharion grinned, and Nosdormu nodded. Satisfied that they knew what to do, and that they also knew they might very well die in the attempt, Malygos arced down. As he descended, he beat his wings as hard as he could, pushing his velocity to its utmost. Below, Galakrond's head appeared not only to swell in size, but also to rush up to meet him. Kalik also understood his host's plan, but had doubts regarding its merits. Still, there was nothing he could do but watch as Malagos reached Galacrond. At the last moment, Malagos shifted so that his hind paws were underneath him. He pulled himself into a ball as much as possible, even folding his wings tight behind him. Out of the corner of his eye, Malagos saw Neltharion do the same. In rapid succession, the 3 proto-dragons struck Galacron hard on the head. Malagos dared not hope to cause much, if any, damage to his target. There was only a very minor chance of that. What Kalik's host did seek was exactly what he got. He made Galacron very angry. The 3 proto-dragons striking so hard did induce some pain. Their velocity was also enough to shove Galacron's head down so that he missed swallowing 2 more victims. The shock of nearly being devoured finally stirred the pair to some effort of escape. It was Neltharion who proved most decisive in causing Galacron's momentary distress. When his hind paws struck, they did so with a force not only one of his family could create. Seismic waves shook the hard head, briefly making the behemoth disoriented, an added respite that Malagos could not have dreamed of gaining. But Galacron recovered too soon. No longer even caring about the pair slowly fleeing from him, he looked up, his wings beating wildly as his fury at actually being assaulted overtook him. And as Malagos had hoped, the gigantic proto-dragon's wings did what the weak wind could not. The mist that Galacron had breathed dissipated rapidly around him. Proto-dragons began to flee in earnest. Galacron did not at first notice that his prey had scattered, so outraged was he at the small foes above him. "Little bugs," he rumbled, each word all but deafening the trio. "A meager meal you are, but a meal you are." To the surprise of not only Galacron but also Malagos and Nosdormu, Neltharion plunged toward the misshapen creature. While Galacron sneered at his puny challenger, Neltharion changed direction and instead of Galacron's snout, attacked the huge proto-dragon's left eye. In few other areas could the impetuous Neltharion have caused any actual harm. Even his previous strike had only irritated Galacron. Yet now, opening his mouth wide, the charcoal gray male erupted with a cry of sheer force. Galacron roared in what was no doubt the first true pain he had felt in some time. He shut the eye hit by Neltharion's strike, and then, when that proved insufficient to put an end to his agony, he shut the other too. "Fly! Fly!" Malagos shouted to anyone who could hear, including Neltharion. "But we have him," his friend insisted. "We do!" Galacron opened his eyes. The left one was as red as blood, but it could still see as well as the other, and both glared at Neltharion with a rage such as Malagos and Kalik had not seen directed at even the icy blue male. Great jaws snapped at Neltharion, who barely evaded them. Nosdormu and Malagos came to the aid of their companion, aiming for the sensitive eyes. Galacron instinctively looked down, making both their attacks hit instead his thick armored brow ridge. But Malagos had not expected anything more than those results, and knew that Nosdormu had thought the same. Once again, Galacron had been distracted, this time saving not only Neltharion, but also Malagos and Nosdormu. With Malagos in the lead, the 3 took to the higher sky and vanished into cloud cover. It did not take Galacron's fearsome roar to inform them that he pursued. The 3 glanced at one another, then split up. Malagos pushed as high as he could. The thinner air made flying more difficult, but he hoped that would also make it troublesome for Galacron to follow. The icy blue male believed that his I'll restart that page and okay. I think this is going to be the last chapter for me tonight. Okay, so we'll start up again. It did not take Galakron's fearsome roar to inform them that he pursued. The three glanced at one another and then split up. Malagos pushed as hard as he could, the thinner air making flying more difficult, but he hoped that would also make it troublesome for Galakron to follow. The icy blue male believed that his friends would do as he did. At the very least, the risks they took aided the survivors of Talonix's ill-fated plan. Silence reigned. Struggling to maintain his position, Malagos looked over the clouds. There was no sign of any other proto-dragon, alive or not. After all Malagos had been through already, the effort to stay aloft grew too taxing to bear. Listening carefully, Calyx's host still heard nothing. He began to wonder if Galakron had moved on. It mattered not. Malagos finally had to descend. He planned to drop only as far as he needed to in order to breathe properly. From there, he would have to judge whether it was safe to continue on. His heart pounded, both from the struggle for air and from the tension of keeping an eye and nose out for Galakron. Calyx, experiencing the same, at times forgot that he was but a passenger. He tried to steer toward the east, only to be reminded that this was not his body when Malagos turned south. Instead, they dived a little farther. The proto-dragon left the cloud cover. The area was empty. The rest of Talonix's followers had wisely fled as fast as they could. But where Malagos and Calyx wandered were Neltharion and Ostormo. Where indeed was Galakron? Something suddenly collided with Malagos from behind. The impact sent both him and the object hurtling toward the ground. He fought against the drop. No struggle! Galakron close! No struggle! Malagos ceased struggling. He let himself be guided to just above the ground and toward a set of low hills. Far above, Galakron's roar reverberated. A few small caves appeared in the distance. Malagos's companion led him into one. He landed in semi-darkness. Calyx's host turned to face his rescuer. Alexstrasza. The fire-orange female hissed quietly. Galakron hears well. Must speak softly. Before he could answer, he heard movement coming from deeper in the cave. Malagos looked there, expecting Alexstrasza's sister to be joining them. Instead, the withered, decaying visage of an undead filled his room. Alright, 'tis late for me and having some joyful fun with the internet right now. I think we're going to leave it at that point. Very interesting. So we have Tyr admitting that he made a mistake with something with Galakron, and then it made Galakron go mad with hunger, and that he wanted to practically eat everything. When Tyr pretty much figured that meant, yeah, I messed up everything. I fucked it up. But then when you look at it, it's like, did Tyr try to elevate this particular dragon and it went wrong, or did, instead of taking the Titans' deal and their gift, that they took somebody else's, like we see in Dragonflight? So in that one, when we cover that in a book, is that, you know, the five dragons take the deal with Titans and become elevated into the aspects, whereas other dragons had made deals with the elementals and became their avatars. So It's either one or the other that happened. I'm not sure which, and I don't know if I want to go and spelunk this out before I actually get to that part of the book. I did read most of this one, but I didn't get very far because it's like, oh, I already know what's going to happen because Galakrond's going to die, and they're going to be uplifted because they proved their worth to the Titans or whatever. So a bit of the ending I didn't really get to, and I'm getting to the point where I stopped reading at that point. It's a thing. All right. I'm going to call it quits here. My throat hurts from talking. I still haven't gotten used to doing all this talking yet. I don't know why. All right, advertisement time. If you liked the stream, please consider a follow and hitting that notification button. We are on Thursday through Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific. I'm looking to figure out a day that we're going to continue on with Portal. It's probably going to be next month. Sorry, after my vacation. But and then we'll start up with a slightly different schedule. Um, I might be doing like Portal on a Thursday or Friday, 2 days of Warcraft, and then Storytime Sunday, which we're going to continue on because there's some books I don't think I've hit, but I've read most of them. Sometimes notifications from Twitch don't go out very readily. Um, I might be late. I might be sick. I might be off. If you want to know about that, hit the Discord. Link down below. Exclamation point Discord. And there's a link where you can join in. This is where I'm active, and I will let you know when I'm going to be on, if I'm running late, if I'm not going to make it on, that kind of thing. We have a Facebook page, not as active on that. This is a better way to get a hold of me. We have other areas we can chat in. There's like different channels and stuff. You know how Discord works. I don't need to tell you this. But we have a YouTube page that is kind of quiet right now, but I am hoping that someday I'm going to get to making my Warcraft videos, my overthinking series, all that kind of stuff there. Making videos is a long process of editing and writing and recording and other junk like that. So, and also I'm the only one that's playing Warcraft, so I am the one who is making all the footage. So there's that. So it's going to take a bit for things to actually get up there. But I would appreciate it if you checked it out. Maybe hit some likes. Give it some screen time. Play things when right now it's got the VODs on there. And I'm trying to get them on completely, but I'm missing some. It is what it is. It needs help with the algorithm. Speaking of algorithm, more eyes on me when I'm alive is gratefully appreciated. Still trying to get to that affiliate spot, and it's a bit tricky with the way this thing is set up. It tends to not count certain viewers, and other viewers it will count, and some they won't. And it doesn't just. It's very complicated how this algorithm works. So anyone who's interested in lore dumps, nerding out, talking about whatever, I'm your person to go to, especially with the upcoming lore within expansion coming up. If you want some live predictions coming up on the story, and most likely than not, you're gonna get the right answer to what's going on before they even say it. I'm your person. As this is what I did. It's like when I first started, I was doing Did I start with Battle for Azeroth or did I start with Shadowlands? I can't remember. Um, I think it was Shadowlands. And I was predicting how the story was going to go, and I just keep nailing it time after time. So, if you want somebody who can explain what's going on in the story, why things are happening, and how it may end up turning out, I'm the person to go to. In case you're curious about that, I know a lot of people kind of rush through the story, and the game itself makes it so that you rush through the story, so you kind of miss out on stuff. And I'm the one who's taking the time to explain it all. Ain't Clarissa, but I'm explaining it all. So, all right, that's about it here. Um, got 3 days off, and then we'll be back on Thursday doing some Warcraft stuff. We're still continuing on with Burning Crusade at this moment, but we're getting closer to the end. We finally found Sibelian last night and started working with him. I must have just forgotten this guy. Every time that there's a rude guy in this game, I just kind of like dismiss him outright. That's why I totally forgot about um so yeah, I forget his name already. Denuzer's character. Um I want to call him Notharian. That's not it. It does start with an N though. Anyway, see, I already forgot him. What a legacy. Anyway, all right, everyone, take care. Survive your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll be back on Thursday at 9 p.m. playing some games, having some fun. Let's have some chit chat. Survive the week. Um, Good luck. Have a good time. Don't melt in the sun because it's totally bad out there. I know it is in my area. Everybody take care, and we will see you next time.